Hello and welcome to James Talks Property. If you're new here, my name's James and I'm on a mission to help investors grow their knowledge and understanding of the property investment market, all without gimmicks and unrealistic promises. If you're not new here, then welcome back. Today's video is all about serviced accommodation or short-term lets. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe and let's get started. So, what is serviced accommodation? Serviced accommodation is essentially where a landlord will rent their property out on a nightly or weekly basis rather than a normal rental agreement. They'll use platforms like Airbnb and Booking.com so they can get a higher rental income per night or per week than they would do as a standard AST. It's essentially like running a property like a hotel. All bills included, fully furnished and flexible check-in times. This is very much a strategy for people that want to benefit from appreciation of an asset but want to get a better short-term cash flow from the property than they would a standard buy-to-let. This is essentially because rather than renting the property out on a monthly basis for £1,000 or £1,500 a month, they can rent it out on a nightly basis or on a weekend for a couple £100 a time. Because of the unique nature of these properties, the location is obviously very important. So where is best for a short-term let or a serviced accommodation? Places these properties often work best are places like tourist locations, so central to towns or heritage cities. This type of serviced accommodation is obviously holiday lets, and what you'll see a lot of holiday lets in coastal towns like Cornwall and other locations like that, where people will often want to rent them on a weekly basis anytime throughout the year, either in summer or other times. You've then got business hubs. This type of serviced accommodation will be used for people like contractors and consultants that maybe don't want to stay in a hotel for the night, they'd rather an apartment or a house that they can feel comfortable in. The final locations for serviced accommodation are event-driven locations. So areas close to stadiums, arenas and universities where people may come and stay for a few days at a time and again, not want to stay in a hotel. It is super important to pick your location carefully because there needs to be a demand for the type of property that you're offering. And in the modern day, there's a lot more competition than there was 5 or 6 years ago, and that is all linked with COVID. Essentially what happened was because of COVID, travel restrictions were in place, people wanted to stay in the UK to go on holiday. What this essentially meant was a lot of people that owned properties throughout the UK changed their properties from buy-to-lets or anything that they were doing previously to short-term let and serviced accommodation. This was because a lot of people recognised that demand was suddenly through the roof. That meant that loads of new serviced accommodation properties entered the market and lots of people made quite a lot of money in quite a short space of time. Although this was great for the short term, once international travel opened up again, demand dropped through the floor. And what that meant is with competition being a lot higher and demand dropping, lots of people had properties on the market that were left empty on a weekly and monthly basis, and people were making a lot less money than they were prior to COVID. This means that you need to stand out in the market if you're going to do serviced accommodation. You can't just have a flat or a house in an area where there's demand. You need to stand out from the crowd. You need to make it look attractive so you can make sure that people want to stay in the property that you own. You also need to be aware of new council restrictions and any legislation that may come in moving forward. Serviced accommodation is the one strategy where there's not that much legislation or restrictions around it. That means if the government want to change things and make things a little bit more difficult to try and address the lack of homes there are in the country, they may address that with short-term lets and serviced accommodation. They may tax higher, they may introduce new legislation, which means that it doesn't become as attractive for you as an owner of a serviced accommodation. That is why whenever I speak to someone who wants to rent the property out on a short-term basis, they need to make sure that the property still stacks up on a buy-to-let basis if things change. So yes, if you want to make a bit more cash in the short term and it's an area of growth, then by all means, you can give it a go if you're willing to look at the extra maintenance. However, make sure that even if things change, you can still own that property and make a small profit. Also, if you're looking to get into this investment strategy, you need to be aware of the operations and what it takes to manage a serviced accommodation property. The first thing is it's hands-on. You need to deal with things like guest management, cleaning in between guests, pricing strategy and listing optimization. This can take time, and although you can get systems in place or you can outsource it, it is not passive unless you build a really good team of people around you or a management company that does everything. And if you do have a management company that does everything, the chances are they'll probably charge you about 20%. I actually used to work with a colleague who owned a property management company for short-term lets and serviced accommodation, and you forget about the little things that you need to be aware of. For example, if you're going to self-manage, you can't go away for the weekend, because if the guests lock themselves out of the property or something breaks within the property, you need to be on hand to be able to fix it. You'll need a reliable cleaning team and strong maintenance contacts. It's essentially all about hospitality. You're running your own micro hotel. So with all this in mind, why would anyone rent the property on a short-term let or serviced accommodation basis? The answer is cash flow. If you're able to run a property that is in high demand and has a high occupancy level, you'll be able to earn yourself a good chunk of cash each month. As well as this, if you own the property and rent it out on a short-term let basis and it's in a holiday destination, you can obviously go and stay at the property yourself whenever you want to do it. Having said that, I would argue this is probably more of a lifestyle choice rather than an investment choice, but it's ultimately your property. You can decide what you want to do with it. And then the final is the tax benefits involved. Again, legislation changes on a regular basis. If you're watching this a year later than when I've recorded it, the legislation may have changed. So just make sure that you're aware of what that looks like, what the tax implications are for you, so you know that you're compliant. Again, this is slightly more risky than something like buy-to-let, because there's a lot more things you need to be involved with or be aware of when doing it. The first thing is void periods. If the property doesn't get rented out, you don't earn a penny. So you need to make sure that your occupancy is high enough in which you're paying for the mortgage that you've got on the property. The second risk is regulation changes. As I mentioned, the government could very easily bring in new regulation or new legislation to limit short-term lets. We're already seeing things like that happen in London, and it will probably happen in other locations moving forward because of the lack of supply of good quality homes across the UK. You've then got to be aware of things like wear and tear and damage to the property. If you're renting the property out on a nightly basis, you can only slightly vet the people that are going to rent the property. Things can happen, people can try and have parties or trash the property, so it's a risk that you're needing to take on, and you need to be aware of that risk when you're doing it. And the final risk or downside of this strategy is the time demand. It's not something that's going to be passive, but if you have the time to do it and you have the patience to do it, then by all means it could be a great strategy. So that's a breakdown of the serviced accommodation strategy. High cash flow potential, but definitely not a passive investment strategy. If you're considering this strategy, then make sure you run it like a business. You're not just a landlord, you're offering a service to these people that are staying in the property. Build the right systems and build the right team around you to make your life as easy as possible. And then that is essentially that. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.